Hello and welcome back to the Wasteland, everybody. Welcome back to Fallout New Vegas, where we are once again going to be taking a look at a weapon in Fallout New Vegas. This time we're going to be taking a look at one of my favorite weapons, even though not particularly a very strong weapon. This is the Silent 22 pistol. This is one of the cooler guns in the game, in my opinion. I really like the Silent 22. I think it's a really cool design, and I love that it showed up in Fallout. There's actually not a whole lot of 22 caliber guns that show up throughout the Fallout series, and this is actually only one of two guns in Fallout New Vegas that gets the 22. So let's go over the base stats and some pros and cons to the 22, and then rank it in our tier list. So for the base stats of the 22, this one requires 0 guns and 1 strength to wield, making it so that literally any character built any way can already effectively use the 22 pistol, which that should be a thing in the game. 22s should not require very much strength to wield, nor should they require that much skill. I like this in the game. I think it's really cool. And even if you're going with like an explosives character, you can absolutely take this. If you're going with a melee character, you can still take this if you would like. It kind of works with any sort of build that you want. Now for the base stats, the Silent 22 does a whopping 9 damage per shot, which is very low, even with modifiers on it, so you can put all the perks and everything that goes to it. It doesn't actually raise it up by that much. I think it raises it to like 10.2 or something like that. There's no specific perk that actually helps out the Silent 22, although there is a couple perks that do help it overall. We'll talk about those when we go to the pros and cons. This has 32 damage per second on it, which is pretty good. The 22 can actually shoot fairly fast. This has an 18 crit damage on it, which is double the base damage, which is pretty unusual. Most weapons tend to have the same amount of crit damage as their base damage. The Silent 22 actually has double that, which is really nice. This has a 3 times crit modifier, which is pretty above average. That's actually, I think, one of the highest of the handguns, or maybe it is the highest out of any of the handguns. Not counting some of the energy pistols, like the Alien Blaster, which has a 100 times multiplier on it. 3 times is still very high, though. This one uses 17 action points per shot, so it's very low. It's actually quite good in an action point build. This one has fairly low spread for a handgun. Nothing crazy. It's not one of the most accurate handguns, but it's not one of the least accurate either. It holds 16 rounds in it by default, which is quite high. This weighs 3 weight in total, and this has 100 item health. So for the basic pros of the Silent 22, this one is silent, which is really nice. Suppressors on guns tend to make it so enemies are less likely to get alerted to you, at least if you're killing nearby enemies with them, or if you hit them with it, then you're probably just going to go to caution, and then you can more easily back that down to the hidden status, so you can do another sneak crit if you would like, which the Silent 22 is actually pretty good at. This counts as a holdout weapon regardless of your skill at all. It doesn't matter how much stealth you have, you can always sneak a Silent 22 into any holdout area, which is pretty cool. This has pretty good crits, and it hits crits pretty often. A 3 times crit modifier is really good. If you have something like 10 luck at the very start of the game, then each point of luck counts towards 1% to your crit chance, and this is additive. So you have 10% crit chance at 10 luck, and then if you add a 3 times multiplier, that'd be a 30% chance of every shot being a crit, which is pretty good, especially since the gun definitely excels at hitting crits. And then you can also buff this up even further with other perks. Like the Professional is actually a pretty good perk to have with this one, where you can do extra crit damage, since crits are going to be where most of your damage is coming from. You can also buff it up with things like better crits to have even stronger crits. You could buff it with Finesse, which will give you an increased crit chance, or Light Touch, which will also give you a percent bonus to crit chance. And then you could also take extra crit clothing, something like the Lucky Shades that will get you extra crit chance, or the First Recon Beret, which will also get you crit chance. If you stack all that on the Silent 22, it's actually not too bad for dealing damage, and has pretty good damage per second. This one also does have a large magazine for a pistol. It has one of the largest magazines out of any pistol, so with that, followed by the extra crits and the fast rate of fire from it, the 22 can actually be surprisingly decent. For the general cons of the 22, though, is that it's kind of a rare-ish weapon. Not everybody sells these, and not a whole lot of people have them, so repairing them in the early game can be a little bit of a pain. Later on, it's not such a big deal if you have jury rigging and you want to repair your 22 with other weapons, because it will just count for any pistol then. It also isn't that big of a deal if you can make weapon repair kits, or if you just have money to where you can go to vendors and have them repair it for you. Second con is that it is kind of rare in terms of ammo, because not a whole lot of people actually sell 22 rounds. It can be kind of annoying trying to buy them, and you might have to just keep resetting areas if you are dead set on using the 22, so that you can at least get more and more bullets back from them. It also doesn't have particularly high damage per shot. That is kind of rough, especially when you're not hitting crits, so if you're in the early game and you don't have a crit build set up yet, the Silent 22 can struggle quite a bit. And then it also lacks a lot of ammo options, since the Silent 22 only gets 3 ammo options, as opposed to most other weapons that get quite a few different ammo options. This gets the standard 22 rounds, the 22 plinking rounds, which you have to buy in bulk, and the 22 hollow point rounds. So the standard 22 rounds just do base damage, just like all the standard rounds do. Plinking rounds make it so you do slightly less damage with the 22. It doesn't actually break your weapon any quicker or anything like that, but it is just less damage. And again, you do have to buy these in bulk, but every time you buy them, I think for every one that you buy, you get 100 rounds of plinking rounds, so it's actually not too bad, especially since you can keep refreshing Chet at the very start of the game and get a decent amount of this stocked up if you want to use the 22. And then for the hollow point rounds, these ones technically can be your best or your worst round. They don't do well against enemies in armor, and the Silent 22 does not do well against armored enemies in general because it does have low damage. So they can actually absorb quite a bit of the damage from the 22 and still just tank right through it. Rad Scorpions can be pretty rough in the early game, and enemies potentially wearing heavy armor, like metal armor, or even just leather armor, can actually slow the 22 down quite a bit. So that kind of sucks. Hollow point rounds at least let you do more damage towards enemies that don't have armor, but if enemies do have armor, then the hollow point rounds are almost completely useless. So for a tier list ranking for the Silent 22, I would probably put this into the D tier of weapons. It's still one of my favorite weapons, but it's not a particularly strong weapon. It does kind of get out-competed by quite a few other pistols. If you want a pistol that can do a similar job, there's quite a lot of them that can actually beat out this one. It's not a terrible weapon by any means. It's not going to our F tier at all, because F tier is going to be saved for some of the truly terrible weapons that are in New Vegas. This one is still perfectly usable, and if you do build a crit build in it, it's not bad at all. It's just that once you start hitting armored enemies, you're basically just stuck with using the standard 22 rounds, and you're still stuck with the problem that the 22 rounds are just kind of rare, so you're going to have to be waiting days and then going around to different vendors. The Great Con vendor tends to sell a lot of 22 rounds, so that's probably the best option for buying 22 rounds if you want to use this or the 22 SMG, and it still has some purpose. It's not a terrible weapon if you just want to carry it around because it doesn't really weigh anything, and if you just wanted to pick off smaller or weaker enemies, by all means do that, or if you just don't want to build the sneak and you just want to have something that you can sneak into casinos, the Silent 22 is decent enough. It's by no means one of the strongest holdout weapons, especially when you have holdout weapons like Chance's Knife. So just like all of these, should you use the Silent 22? Maybe. If you're gonna go with just a strong build all the way around, you can probably skip it. It's not gonna be a huge deal. It might be okay in the early game. And if you're going for a crit build, it can still be kind of decent, even though, again, there are better handguns than it and better weapons for building a sneak build. It's still a really cool gun, and I do really like it. Today we're going to be taking a look at the 9mm pistol, a weapon you get introduced to it just in the first couple seconds of the game when you get shot in the head with one. So the 9mm pistol is probably going to be one of the very first guns that you find. You can actually start out with this if you decide to tag guns. At the very start at Doc Mitchell's house, he'll give you a 9mm, and 9mm are super common throughout the Wasteland, especially in the early game. This is modeled off of a Browning high-powered pistol, which is a really cool addition to the game. I'm glad that they used this gun. Also, somewhat little side tangent, the high-powered is actually a pretty modern pistol for when it was made, since this is actually a 13-round magazine, semi-automatic pistol with pretty good sights, and this was made in the mid-1930s, which is more advanced than most other handguns at the time, so that's pretty cool. For the base stats of the 9mm pistol, this one requires 0 guns to wield and only 2 strength, so basically any character is going to be able to wield this. This is an early game weapon, so that's pretty common for most people to be able to wield this. This does 16 damage per shot, which isn't the highest, but it's still okay. This does 50 damage per second. You can spam the 9mm pretty fast, so damage per second is good. This has 16 crit damage on it, same as regular damage, a 1x crit modifier, which is normal. Only costs 17 action points to use in VATS. It's actually one of the better early game VATS weapons if you're going with a VATS build. This one weighs 1.5 weight, so very lightweight, and this one has 150 item health, which is pretty high for an early game handgun. That's not bad, especially with how common these are. A 9mm can be really useful on just about any character, just so that you have some sort of ranged option, because you're likely going to find a whole lot of bullets early on, and you're likely going to find a whole lot of 9mm to fix this up with, so you won't need weapon repair kits, and you don't have to worry about getting up to jury rigging to upgrade your pistol or to manage it better. Vendors also tend to sell this a lot. Oh, I also forgot to mention, the spread is 0.7, so it's one of the least accurate handguns in the game, but not too bad by handgun standards. and it holds 13 rounds in it. This can be increased with one of the mods, which we'll talk about in a second. For the pros of the 9mm, this one is a really good early game weapon. It's really nice to spam at just about anything. Ammo is super common with this too, so it's not difficult to find ammo whatsoever. It has pretty good damage per second, and the AP cost is really good, so even if you're not that great with guns in general in these type of games, the VAT system can really carry you in the early game, which is really nice to see. For the general cons of this though, it does have low damage per shot, so it's not really that great against armored enemies, and that's really its only major con to it. I guess it not being super accurate either, but you're probably not going to be using handguns at very long range a lot of the time, so that doesn't matter too much. And I guess armored enemies can kind of be an issue too, just with 9mm in general, because you don't have a great way of punching through armor. You do have the plus P rounds, which give you a little bit of armor piercing, but that's your only amount of armor piercing that you do have. Speaking of ammos, the 9mm has 4 different ammos that you can load into it. It has the standard 9mm, which gives you standard damage just across the board. Nothing really crazy there. You have the plus P rounds. These ones make it so you do more damage per shot with your 9mm, and you have armor breaking, but it does break your gun faster than it otherwise would. This one's pretty good to load into the 9mm too. You do have to buy these sadly, so you can't make them, but they can be useful when you can buy them. There is also the hollow point rounds. Hollow point rounds get you more damage per shot, but they give the enemy 3 times the amount of armor, or 3 times the amount of damage threshold, so that they can just tank through this, so it's really not good against armored enemies. Pretty good against non-armored or light armored enemies though. You can actually rack up a lot of DPS with this. And then if you have the hand loader perk, you can also load in the jacketed hollow point rounds, which give you 65% more damage, so 10% less than the regular hollow point rounds, but they only give the enemies 2 times the armor, so they're much better against light armored enemies. They're still not going to be way great against heavily armored enemies, but I generally consider them an upgrade over the standard hollow point rounds most of the time. For a rating on my tier list, I would put the 9mm pistol into the C tier. I think it's perfectly fine early on, and it still actually is pretty good even to the later game if you want to carry around a 9mm. Because you can at least use it to pick off small things, and 9mm rounds are pretty common all throughout the game, whether it be that vendors sell a bunch of them, or you can just find enemies that have them. Like in the early game, tons of the convicts have them, so by the time you're getting to Prim, you're probably going to have to be fully stocked up on like 9mm rounds, which is pretty awesome, and 9mm pistols for that matter. Let's talk about the modded version of the 9mm, where you can put 2 mods on the 9mm handgun. And these ones do change it at least a decent amount. You can put an extended magazine, so you go from holding 13 rounds, which is already pretty good, up to 20 rounds, which is really nice to have. You can spam this quite a bit. And you can also put a short-range scope on this. The scope is kind of nice. It's better sights than the regular 9mm sights, so it's a little bit better at long to medium-ish range. But it's still not way accurate, so it's not going to be amazing at super long range. You don't really want to be using this as like an improvised sniping pistol. If you want to do that, the hunting revolver is a whole lot of a better option, or the 44 Magnum with the scope on it's a lot better option than the 9mm, but it's still okay. The big one is more the magazine, because holding 20 rounds makes it so you don't have to reload this very often, which is great. And when you're spam firing this at small enemies, you likely don't really care where a lot of your shots are going because 9mm rounds are so common. So I really like the extended magazine, and I think just these two added onto the 9mm would actually push it up the ranking a little bit, up into B tier. It's probably on the very low end of B tier for a pistol, but it's at least a decent upgrade to the handgun, so I really like that. There is also a unique version of the 9mm, which is the one that you get shot in the head with at the very start. This one is called Maria, and this one Benny has. So you have to take it off of Benny. There's actually even an achievement for killing Benny with his own pistol. So if you can shoot this out of his hand or something, I like to do it with the Silent 22, then pick it up and then shoot him with it, then you can actually get an achievement for killing him with his own pistol. Maria requires 0 guns and 2 strength, just the same as the regular 9mm. This one does 20 damage per shot, which is pretty good. 75 damage per second, and its damage per second is actually really good. 20 crit damage, same as its regular damage. Has a 2 times crit modifier though, so you're more likely to hit crits with this weapon. Only costs 15 action points to use. It's one of the best VATS weapons actually. If you want to be using Maria, especially against like non-armored enemies, it can be really nice. This one also weighs 1.5 weight, has 200 item health, has much less spread than the regular 9mm. This one's only 0.2 rather than a 0.6, so this one's one of the most accurate handguns, funny enough. And this one is stuck at the 13 rounds. You can't have the extended mag onto this unless you want to mod the game, in which case then you can. But 13 rounds is still plenty enough with this gun. This gun's actually quite a bit better. It's arguably one of the best handguns in the game, just kind of for doing handgun type stuff. It's not going to be an amazing weapon at everything, because long range it's not great, and against armored enemies it's not going to be way great either. But against anything else, it's going to be a very solid option. And I'd actually put Maria all the way up into the A tier. I think it's a really good gun overall. We should also go over some perks that help out with the 9mm too. aside from just all of the regular like crit perks and standard damage perks, which will help just about any weapon. The 9mm pistol is affected by the grunt perk, which gets you 25% more damage, and that actually makes the 9mm pretty relevant, and that's why I'd put these as high as I do, because the grunt perk does help them a lot. You get 25% more damage with Maria. That means you're going to have even more damage per second. You load this thing with like the jacketed hollow points, and you're just set to go most of the time. You can also take something like the Professional as a perk too, which gets you more crit damage with one-handed weapons, and these both count as one-handed weapons, so that can also help quite a bit. It makes Maria even more consistent. So in conclusion, would I recommend the 9mm pistol? Yeah, absolutely. In the early game, it's probably going to be your go-to weapon, assuming you're using a guns build. If you're using melee, unarmed, or really anything else, maybe it won't, but even then, it still isn't a bad thing to carry around just so that you have something that has bullets, that has range. The 9mm pistol can still serve you really well. And into the later game, the modded version or Maria can still be really good as a backup handgun. Maybe it won't be your go-to weapon, but it's still not bad for just using in enclosed areas, especially against non-armored enemies. Just load it with like hollow points and you're good to go. Today we're going to be taking on a classic weapon in Fallout New Vegas, and just kind of a classic weapon in all the Fallout games. Today we're going to be talking about the 10mm pistol, so welcome to the Wasteland, where we're going to be discussing one of the most iconic handguns in Fallout. So the 10mm pistol has popped up in almost every single Fallout. It doesn't pop up in Tactics, I'm aware of that, where they actually just have regular guns in that one. The 10mm pistol is kind of its own fantasy design, and it has changed quite a bit. In real life, this kind of looks like a deagle, a little bit, so I think that's kind of the inspiration from it, but the 10mm has changed quite a lot throughout the games. It's definitely different in the first two Fallouts. It wasn't in Tactics. In 3 in New Vegas, it has the same model, but then in 4 it was also changed as well. So the 10mm pistol is generally considered an early game weapon in most of these. Fallout New Vegas, kind of, with the unique version of it, but not necessarily with the regular 10mm. You can certainly get them early on, but they're not going to be as common as like the 9mm handgun that we usually get in New Vegas. So the 10mm can be held by different members. Sometimes powder gangers can have this, various raiders can have this. It's really not hard to buy 10mm from vendors. I think Chet can sell them. I'm pretty sure Jonathan can sell them in Prim. The 188 can sell them. There's quite a few other ones that can sell them. So you can get 10mm pretty early on. And if you have the extra DLCs for the starting equipment, then you get the unique one right away too. So the 10mm pistol requires 25 guns and 4 strength in order to wield. Fairly low guns, fairly low strength as you'd kind of expect for a weapon like this. This deals 22 damage per shot, which is okay, 61 damage per second, which is also okay. The 10mm doesn't shoot incredibly quick, it's slower than the 9mm, but has a little bit more damage per shot. This one has 22 crit damage on it, which is pretty good. Has a 1x crit modifier, only costs 17 action points. The 10mm pistol is actually quite good for a VATS build, although a lot of handguns are pretty good for a VATS build. This one does have quite a lot of spread for a handgun at 0.8. That makes it one of the least accurate handguns in New Vegas. It's not as bad as like the 12.7mm pistol, but it's not as good as some of the pistols we've talked about. This holds 12 rounds in it by default, although that can be increased, so that's nice. It's a decent amount of ammo. This one weighs 3 weight, so it's not very heavy, and this has 80 item HP. It doesn't have a whole lot of item HP, making it so the 10mm can break fairly quick. For the pros of the 10mm pistol, this one is a very early game weapon. If you have the DLC, you get to start out with the unique one, which is really cool. It has pretty good damage per second as well. The damage per second is decent enough for most jobs, and the ammo is common enough too. It's not necessarily the most versatile ammo, since it's similar to other ammo types like the 9mm or the 12.7, where it is mostly catered towards enemies that are non-armored and it doesn't do particularly well against armored enemies, but you can still find a decent amount of it in the early game and from vendors. The cons for this one, the low item HP does hurt it quite a bit. It can break quite fast, so you're probably not going to be able to use this a whole lot, although with how common it is, you can fix them up pretty easily. And the 10mm is probably going to fall off later. Even if you like semi-automatic handguns, there are still better semi-automatic handguns than the 10mm into the late game of New Vegas. Not saying that this one would be unusable, but it probably wouldn't be as strong as some of the other ones. For perks that can help out with the 10mm, I'd recommend action point perks, so Action Boy, Action Girl, or Mathrath. Those ones are pretty nice since it already does well with a VATS build. You can build into that. There isn't any perk that specifically helps this one, although you would think that Grunt would, since in the lore, the military did use the 10mm quite a bit, but Grunt doesn't affect this one. That will only affect like the 9mm pistol and submachine gun, not the 10mm for some reason. Maybe that's supposed to be a distinction between like army, military, and like government, like FBI or something like that. Maybe it's just an oversight when they put in the perk. I'm not really sure. This one does have 3 different ammos that you can load into it as well. So you got the standard 10mm rounds. These ones deal regular damage, and they're going to be the most common thing that you find. You have hollow point rounds, which deal extra damage, but give the enemy extra armor. So it's bad against armored enemies, pretty good against unarmored enemies. And then you also have the jacketed hollow points, which you get from the perk hand loader. This one is very similar to hollow points, where you do get more damage, but the enemy gets more armor. It's just you don't get as much damage, but the enemy doesn't get as much armor, making it generally a better overall option, and that's usually the ammo that I load into this. For an overall rating on my tier list for the 10mm pistol, I would probably put this one into C tier by default. It's an okay enough handgun that I don't use a whole lot, but I'm never really disappointed in it. It's perfectly fine, and with this handgun and the unique version of it, you can also sneak these into casinos so long as you have 50 sneak, so they are actually pretty decent in that role. But a lot of the time, I'm not going to go for the 10mm pistol as like my go-to gun for most of the playthrough. I'm generally going to skip over this one, with the exception of like the unique one. There is also 3 mods that we can put on this, so let's talk about the modded version of the 10mm pistol. You can get an extended mag. This increases your magazine size from 12 to 16, which is pretty good. You can get a laser sight, which increases your spread. This one helps a lot because it actually cuts your spread in half, so you go to 0.4, making it so you're actually a pretty accurate handgun, which is nice. And you have a silencer on this, so you can have suppressed shots, which can also be good if you like sneaking this around, and it can be useful if you want to sneak in into areas. This is a pretty decent gun then. I think all of these do increase the 10mm usefulness, and I would probably move this up a tier, going from C tier to B tier. It's a decent overall handgun with all the mods on it. Plus, I like the look of it a little bit better. Also, the 10mm in the footage that I'm using is from a mod. It looks a little bit different. The unique version actually isn't going to have that model. So let's move over to the unique version, which is called the weathered 10mm pistol. This one you get with the add-on DLCs that you get at the very start of the game. So this is the Vault Dweller pack, I believe. There's also like the Merchant pack, the Mercenary pack, and the Raider pack. So you can have all of those at the very start of the game, and they give you weapons like this. So the weathered 10mm does look like a more weathered handgun. It's had almost everything like stripped off of it to where it's very bare steel. I do kind of like the look of that, which is awesome, but it definitely looks different than the gun that I was just using. So this one has lower requirements than a regular 10mm. This one comes in at 0 guns and only 4 strength. Same strength, but less guns. A lot of the early game weapons that are in that pack kind of do this. That way you can use them right out the gate to full effect. This one does 24 damage per shot, so slightly more damage. 66 damage per second, again slightly more. Has 24 crit damage, has a 1x crit modifier, same 17 action points, same spread at 0.8, same magazine size at 12, and same weight at 3. It does have more item HP than a regular 10mm though, at 110, so it will break a little bit slower, but it's still going to break fairly fast if you intend on using this quite a bit. Which you might in the early game, because at least they do give you like 50 rounds of 10mm for this. So that can actually be pretty good in the early game, because it is better than a 9mm a lot of the times, at least shot for shot. And you might not have a fully fixed up 9mm at least right away. You can get one pretty early on in your game though. The weathered 10mm pistol also has the unique ability of being able to have all of the mods put on it as well. So this is the same as the grenade launcher that you can start out with. The Mercenary's grenade launcher can also have the extended tube on it, giving it a bonus. The weathered 10mm is the same way. Although in the base game, the mods do not show up on the weathered 10mm once you attach them. I have a mod that fixes that, so they are implemented on mine. But if you don't have that, then you're just going to have to, I guess, pretend that they're on there, pretend that you have a suppressor, pretend that you have the laser, and pretend that you have the extended mag on there. So you can get all the same things onto there, and it will make it a little bit better. I'm going to rate the weathered 10mm the same as I did the regular 10mm. It is a little bit better, and it's nice that you start out with this, but it's not massively better than the regular gun. It's just a nice little bonus to have. So the regular weathered 10mm I would put up into C tier. The modded version of it I would put up into B tier because it is a little bit better then. Today we're going to be talking about a fan favorite gun and one that's been requested quite a bit on these lists. We are going to be talking about the 45 pistol or the 1911 or Joshua's pistol. We're going to be talking about all of them. So the 1911 handgun is a very, very iconic handgun. It both in real life and in video games. It's been around for forever. It was adopted in 1911 by the US military and then went into service shortly after that. So it's been through World War I, World War II, and in the Fallout universe, World War III as well. And it still sees a lot of use, at least in Zion. And its most popular wielder, at least in the Wasteland, is Joshua Graham. So the 45 auto pistol, which I'm just going to refer to as the 1911 from now on, requires 25 guns in order to wield. It requires also 3 strength to wield, so it's very low skill and strength requirements. Really, at any time, if you're going to run to Zion, you can get the 45 auto pistol and be able to use it pretty effectively. This one does 29 damage per shot, which is pretty decent. This one has 80 DPS, which is really high. You can shoot the 45 pretty fast. This one also has 29 crit damage, which is good. It's about what you would expect from most handguns. Usually crit damage is the same as their regular damage. This has a 1x crit chance modifier, so average. Interestingly enough, the 45 only costs 17 action points in order to use, though, in VATS. So the 45 pistol is really, really strong in VATS because you can shoot it a lot against multiple enemies, which is really cool. So if you're going with the VATS build, it might be something that you want to grab early on. A lot of the handguns are actually pretty decent in a VATS build. This one has 0.8 spread, so it is one of the least accurate handguns in the game. It's not horribly inaccurate, and at most of the ranges you're going to be using this at, it's going to be fine. You're usually not trying to snipe with most pistols. You could arguably do that with like the hunting revolver, and I think that would be probably your best case scenario for a sniper pistol if you want to go with a build like that. This one holds 7 shots in it by default. This one weighs 1.5 weight, so it's not super heavy either, and it is affected by the pack rat perk, which is pretty cool, since that cuts everything in half that weighs 2 or less. And this one has 150 item health, which is not a whole lot, and you can break this fairly quick with at least one of its special ammos. It's not terrible compared to other handguns, though. It's not going to break super fast, and generally you're going to be able to put things down a little bit quicker with the 1911 than some of the other handguns that we've talked about, or handguns that we will talk about, like the 9mm pistol. So let's move to the pros and cons of the 1911. The pros, this one does have really good damage per second. That's really awesome. This one can be silenced with a suppressor on it, and it's one of the strongest suppressed weapons, or at least suppressed handguns that you can sneak into places. You can sneak this into areas. It has very low action point cost, and it has a pretty strong round. All of those are really, really nice. For the major cons of this, though, is that it is a DLC weapon, so if you're playing vanilla New Vegas and you don't have mods installed that make it so enemies can carry around the 1911, then you're only going to be able to find this in Zion. So you do have to go to a DLC in order to get it, and once you go to that DLC, you do have to play through the entirety of the DLC in order to leave. On top of that, its ammo is also a DLC, so again, in vanilla New Vegas, vendors aren't going to be selling this until you leave Zion. So you're only going to be able to find and buy 45 auto there. Vendors do tend to sell at least a decent amount of it, though, after you've completed Zion, after you've completed the Honest Hearts DLC, so finding ammo afterwards isn't such a huge deal. But finding it anytime during the DLC can be a little bit of a pain if you're going to just go with the 1911 there. And then the final con to this is that it does have a decent amount of weapon spread. So it's not going to be super accurate, at least at very long ranges. We already talked about, though, and you don't really need to be using it at long range, but it is just something to kind of keep in mind. There is also one perk that we should talk about that affects the 45 quite a bit, and that is the Grunt perk. Grunt is added in Honest Hearts, and if you get this, then it makes it so all army-style weapons get more damage than they otherwise would. This includes things like the 9mm pistol, the 45 pistol, 9mm SMG. It covers actually a lot of weapons, and it does make it so the DPS can go up really high with the 45, and I would highly recommend that you get it. It's just a very strong perk overall. The only builds it's not super strong on would be like unarmed and energy weapon builds that just don't really get much of a benefit from it. And we should also probably talk about the different ammunition that goes into the 45 pistol too. For different ammunitions, you have 4 of them. You have the standard 45 rounds, which are just like most standard rounds. They give you regular damage, regular spread, regular everything. Nothing crazy about them or nothing strange about them. You have hollow points, which are the general hollow points, so you get 75% more damage, but any target that you're fighting gets 3 times the amount of armor whenever you shoot them. So if you're fighting light armored or non-armored enemies, then this one is really strong. If you're fighting armored enemies, then this one is not very strong at all, so just keep that in mind. You also have the plus P rounds, which these ones are the same as the 9mm plus P rounds, where you get 10% more damage and you ignore 2 armor, but your gun breaks 20% faster. This is generally a bonus to the weapon, however, you do have to just buy this, you can't make it in any way. So finding a lot of plus P is really difficult for the 45. It's also really difficult for the 9mm. I wish there was a bit of a better way to do this, either through perks, at least in the vanilla game, or just being able to do it naturally on the reloading bench. But if you do find it, then it is a little bit of a bonus, so that's pretty good. And then if you have the perk handloader, then you also get access to the 45 super rounds. And the super rounds are really cool. These ones give you 30% more damage and ignore 4 points of damage threshold, which is pretty good. But they do break your gun 250% faster. So you can break the 45 really quick this way, but it does hit enemies really hard, and ignoring that much armor is quite good on a handgun. This actually makes it fairly efficient against light and medium armored enemies. Heavier armored enemies can still kind of tank through the shots to some extent, but it will still hurt them regardless. For an overall rating on my tier list, I would put the 45 pistol up in a B tier. It's a decent handgun that's kind of above average at everything. It looks really cool and I really enjoy it. It feels really nice too. Just some of the downsides that come with being a DLC weapon sort of hold it back. There is a modded version and a unique version that we need to talk about too. So let's talk about the modded version, which gets 2 mods. This gets the suppressor on it, and it also gets the heavy duty slide. The suppressor is pretty straightforward. It just makes it so your gun is suppressed then, which makes it so enemies are less likely to find you after you've shot a shot near them. Or if you've killed somebody, then it makes it so that they are more likely to ignore you, which that's kind of nice, and it does look pretty cool, as well as the sound effect is pretty decent on the 45, both unsuppressed and suppressed. And then the slide gives you 50% more item durability. This is pretty good. Makes it so you get another 75 HP added to your pistol, so you go up to 225 total HP. That's pretty good for a handgun. That's fairly durable. Again, you can break it fairly quick if you're shooting the super rounds through it, but it's a nice bonus to the weapon, and it just makes the weapon better overall. These are also really easy to get, like most of the DLC weapon attachments, because you can just buy these directly from Joshua as soon as you go to Zion. You can buy a 45 pistol plus as much ammo as you want or can afford, and then the suppressor and the slide on it, and have yourself a fully decked out 1911 as soon as you go to Zion, basically, which is really, really cool. You can do the same thing with the 45 SMG and the War Club too. For the different add-ons to this, I wouldn't actually move it up any in terms of tiers. I would still keep the modded 45 into B tier as well. It is really nice to have a suppressor on it. It's really nice for it to have extra health, but it doesn't really change it too much. It's better as a holdout weapon, but there's not a whole lot of holdout areas. It is probably one of the best holdout weapons overall, though, because it kind of works well in any sort of situation. There's a couple weapons that do that really well. This one, like the 44 Magnum, Lucky, and things like Chance's Knife are really strong. There's actually a lot of melee and unarmed that's really strong in holdout areas. The modded 45 is also really nice. If you like it that way, then go ahead and use it. If you don't like it that way and you like the standard 1911, you can also use it that way. I find that both of them are really good. The unique version is Joshua's handgun, and Joshua's handgun is called a light shining in darkness. This is actually a reference to a verse in the Bible, which is pretty fitting for Joshua to have a handgun like this. I believe the verse goes something like, "The light shineth and the darkness comprehend it not," or something along those lines. This one you get from completing Honest Hearts. So after you've already done all the main quests to Honest Hearts, then there will be a footlocker at the end of it, and this will have Joshua's handgun. It will also have other things like Salt Upon Wounds Power Fist. You'll also get Salt Upon Wounds helmet, Joshua's outfit, and Daniel's outfit too. So you get a lot of gear from that. This one is different in terms of requirements and just kind of different overall. This is a shorter 1911. I don't think it's technically a 1911. I think it's like a Colt Commander or something. I don't remember the exact name of it. Basically, it's just a squished down 1911. This one requires 75 guns to wield and 3 strength. So strength requirement is still extremely low, but the guns requirement has upped substantially. You do need to have a decent amount of guns to wield this effectively, which is kind of cool and makes sense for this particular weapon. This does 33 damage a shot, so slightly more damage than the standard 45. This one does 144 damage per second, so a lot faster rate of fire with this one, and a lot more DPS because of that, which is really good. This one does 33 crit damage, which is about normal. This one has a 2x crit modifier, so it's more likely to hit crits. This one only requires 15 action points to use, so it's even better in a VATS build than the standard 45, which is already really good for a VATS build. This one has a 0.55 spread, which is okay for a handgun. It's about on the average. It's not super accurate, but it's not super inaccurate either. And most of the time you're not going to be using a handgun at super long range anyway, but this one is a little bit better than the regular 45. This one does only hold 6 rounds in it. Since it's a smaller gun, it can't hold as many rounds in it. 6 shots might not seem like very much for a semi-automatic handgun, but this thing has a really fast reload. So usually the way I use this is just mag dump the whole thing and then reload to the next enemy, unless I can kill the enemy in 1 or 2 shots. But usually I'm going to be using this against fairly strong enemies because the damage per second is really high. That gets even higher with Grunt. It's really, really strong with the Grunt perk. This one also doesn't weigh very much at 1.2 weight, so it's one of the lightest handguns in the entire game, which is pretty cool. And this one has 250 item health to it, so it can actually survive the super rounds loaded into it pretty well. And if you do load super rounds into this, the DPS goes up really high, and it can shred through just about anything in the game. This is probably one of the strongest handguns overall in the entire game. It's one of my absolute favorite handguns in the entire game. It is very fun to use. It is quite strong. Can break kind of quick if you're using the super rounds, but that's just kind of the downside of using those bullets. And this one I would put much higher than the other handguns. I would put this one straight up into the S tier. I think this is one of the best handguns in the game overall, just kind of everything. You can also sneak this in anywhere, as you would kind of expect, since you can sneak the regular 45 in. And this one is terrifying in any of the enclosed areas where you can sneak weapons in, because most of the time enemies don't have very high armor. And if you don't have very high armor and you have a gun that does a lot of DPS, then you can clear up the area really, really fast. So that's pretty cool. So overall, should you use the 1911 in Fallout New Vegas? If you're using a pistol build, then yeah, absolutely. Or if you just really like the look of it, then yeah, absolutely. It's just an overall really strong weapon. Same goes with its unique version. Both are really good. They're both really cool. I know a lot of people really like them. That's probably why this video got requested by so many people. I think this one was the second or most requested just after the That Gun video, which was the 5.56 pistol, which I also understand. The Blade Runner handgun is really cool too. Today we're going to be taking a look at the 12.7mm pistol and its unique variant. So the 12.7mm pistol is a bit of an odd pistol since it doesn't seem to be based on any actual handgun. It's kind of a mishmash of guns, and I don't know of any gun that actually functions like it. It's most likely based on the 14mm pistol that was in Fallout 2, which is also a weird gun, and I don't think that that's based off of anything either, but I could be wrong about that. So the 12.7mm handgun is probably going to be one of the later game guns that you find. There's not a whole lot of places where you can find this pistol. There is a few places where the pistol can spawn, and there's a few enemies like the Great Khans can have the 12.7mm pistol on them. But even then, so long as you're not fighting with the Khans, I don't think I've really been shot at with the 12.7mm handgun. It would probably be kind of scary because it is fairly good. Let's go over the stats of it, where this one requires 75 guns to wield and 7 strength. That is a lot of strength for a pistol. Most pistols do not have that much strength. A lot of guns too, but if you're going with a guns build, that's not such a big deal. It's more that 7 strength that might actually give you problems because not every guns character wants to go that high into strength. If you're going with a 50 cal, then this may not be an issue and you actually want to hit those requirements. This one does 40 damage per shot, which is fairly high, especially for a handgun. This one does 110 damage per second. You can shoot out the 12.7 fairly fast. This one does 40 crit damage, same as its normal damage, has a 1x crit modifier. This one only costs 17 action points to be using in VATS. It's actually really good in a VATS build. This has the most spread out of any handgun in the game at 1.1. So it's the least accurate, which is kind of an issue. You only really want to be using this at close range. This one has a magazine of 7 rounds in it, which is okay. The magazine animation's a little bit weird too. That kind of bothers me about this weapon for some reason. This one also weighs a lot for a handgun at 3.5 weight. That's a massive amount for a handgun. And this has 80 item health, so it doesn't have very much item health. For the pros of the 12.7mm pistol, this one does do high damage and high damage per second. At close range, this can actually rack up quite a bit of damage. That is really nice. Cons to this though, the high spread is definitely one of them. It is not a very accurate handgun, especially compared to some handguns like the Ranger Sequoia. So it feels substantially worse at longer ranges. Ammo's a little bit limiting with what your choices are. It's not such a big deal since all the 12.7mm guns have high base damage. So even though they just have the regular ammo, hollow points, and jacketed hollow points, it's not too bad. We'll talk about that in just a second. And this weapon does have low item health. It's going to break itself fairly fast, which is a little bit annoying for a weapon like this, especially if you don't have jury rigging. If you have jury rigging, not such a big deal because you can just repair it with any other handgun. There isn't really any perks that help out with this one either. The only kind of perks that do help out with it are action point perks. So Math Wrath, Action Boy, Action Girl, those type of perks, Gunslinger, all of them help with this particular weapon, but that's only if you want to be using them in a VATS build, which does actually kind of help because if you're using this at medium range where the accuracy isn't that great, then VATS is actually a really good option. It's also interesting that the 12.7mm is not a sneak-in weapon, no matter how much sneak you have, so you can't sneak this into places like you can with other handguns. The unique version you're supposed to be able to, but I believe that it's bugged in the base game. I have mods that fix that to where it works the way that it should. But in the base game, I think Little Devil is actually bugged to where you can't sneak it into casinos, even though it's supposed to be a regular sneak-in weapon, so it doesn't matter how much sneak, or at least it's supposed to mean that no matter how much sneak you have, you could sneak it into a casino, or just any of the holdout areas. As for the different ammos that we do have the regular 12.7mm rounds. These ones do regular damage, regular armor piercing, everything normal. These are going to be your best options for fighting armored enemies because you don't have any armor piercing rounds. You have hollow points, which give you more damage against non-armored enemies, but make it so enemies do have increased armor, so it can be kind of bad against big things that have a lot of armor. And then you also have the jacketed hollow points if you have the handloader perk. These ones give you a bit more damage, not quite as much as hollow point rounds, but pretty close, and they don't give the enemy as much armor. So these ones are better against light armored enemies and still non-armored enemies. Usually I'll be loading regular rounds or the jacketed hollow point rounds into the weapon. I do find the 12.7mm pistol to be a little bit awkward, and it's not really one of my favorite pistols, which is why I think I'm just going to put this one into B tier on my tier list. It's still quite strong. It still is really good at close range. It's just by the time I'm getting this, I usually don't see a reason in using it when I could take something like the survivalist rifle that has better long range and just better overall damage and has perks that affect it and is arguably better in a VATS build too. Or I could take the 12.7mm submachine gun that just has more damage and more damage per second. Well, it doesn't have more damage per shot, but it has a lot more damage per second. And that one I can just spray down enemies with a lot better. There is a modded version of the 12.7mm, but the only mod you can put on this is a suppressor, so I'm not going to add another graphic to the tier list because it doesn't really change it that much. Since you can't sneak this in, it doesn't really help it. I do like the look of this weapon a lot more once it has the suppressor, and the sound that it has once it has the suppressor on there. I think that is much better than the regular 12.7mm, but it doesn't really change it substantially. It's similar to like adding the suppressor to the 1911, where it's good, it's cool looking, but it doesn't really change the weapon all that much from what its role already was. And let's move over to the unique version, which is called Little Devil. You can buy Little Devil from Mick and Ralph's. This is going to be a very expensive weapon because this is a gunrunner's arsenal weapon, so it's going to cost you a lot, and it is basically a full price weapon. At least I think it's Mick and Ralph's, or is it Gunrunners? Yeah, it is sold by Mick and Ralph's, but if Mick and Ralph are dead, then you can buy it from the Gunrunners. Little Devil requires 75 guns and 8 strength to wield. It has the highest strength requirement out of any pistol, and that's higher strength requirement than almost any rifle besides like the 50 cal, and I think the light machine gun and maybe the Bowser. I think those are the only like rifles, and I would argue the light machine gun and the Bowser are more heavy weapons anyway. So yeah, about the 50 cal is the only thing that this is out strength requirementing, which is really weird for a handgun like this. This one does 45 damage per shot, so quite a bit more damage per shot than the 12.7mm. This one has 146 damage per second. Its damage per second is a lot higher because you can shoot it faster. This does 45 crit damage, which is also really good. This one has a 2x crit modifier, which is one of its biggest bonuses. It's more likely to hit crits, which is very nice. This one has even lower action point cost at only 15, so it is one of the best VATS weapons in the entire game in terms of shot for shot performance. This one has better spread than the regular pistol, but it's still pretty bad for even by pistol standards at 0.9. You still want to be using this at close to medium range, not really at long range. Little Devil is not as good. If you're going to be doing that with a pistol, the hunting revolver or the Ranger Sequoia would be much better options than this. This still holds 7 rounds in it. This one weighs slightly less weight at 3.2, which is still fairly heavy for a handgun. And this one does actually have pretty good item health at 120. That isn't going to break super fast. Little Devil is all around just a straight upgrade from the 12.7mm gun. And I do think that it is one of the better handguns in the game, especially with its low action point cost and its double crit chance modifier. I don't really prefer this over certain handguns though in New Vegas. I would still rather have like the Ranger Sequoia or Light Shining in Darkness than Little Devil, but Little Devil is pretty good, and I'm going to put this one on the low end of S tier. I think it's one of the better handguns overall, even if it's not personally one of my favorite handguns. It would also be better if you could sneak this into areas like you're supposed to be able to. It would also be better if Mr. Holdout had Little Devil too, since that would be more fitting for him to be selling this weapon. Today we're going to be taking on a very iconic gun from New Vegas. This is the 357 revolver. This is actually what you see on the title screen where the Ranger has it. It's kind of weird that the Ranger has this instead of the Ranger Sequoia or hunting revolver or the 44. They actually have the 357 revolver, which is kind of cool. I do like seeing that. The 357 revolver is one of the very first guns that you can get. Chat can sell these. You can also steal one of these from the bar right at the very start of the game, which I always do. And it is a pretty cool little gun. It's probably the most powerful handgun that you're going to be finding early on. It's one of the most powerful guns that you are actually going to be finding in the very early game, assuming that you're just going around Good Springs and you're not like rushing to a unique weapon like Chance's knife or something. But the 357 does actually do pretty decent damage and has a pretty potent cartridge that it's using. So the 357 revolver requires 0 guns and only 3 strength to wield effectively. Makes sense since it's an early game weapon that you can buy from the starting vendors and that you can get very early on. Most characters are going to be able to use this no problem. This one does 26 damage per shot, which is pretty decent. That's not bad. That's actually pretty high for the start. That's better than something like the 9mm or even the 10mm. Even though it doesn't really stack up with the DPS that you can put out with either of those guns. And it's not going to be as powerful as like the single shot shotgun, but it's still fairly powerful. This does 46 damage per second. You can actually fire the 357 surprisingly quick, at least compared to other games that have like the single action army in it where they're just quite a bit slower. In this you can spam it actually fairly fast. At least for a single action revolver. It's still not going to be as quick as like the 9mm pistol or 10mm or whatever. This one does 26 crit damage, which is fine. It's the same as its regular damage. Has a 1x crit modifier, normal crits. Costs 26 action points, which is fine. That's a little bit above what most handguns have, but it's still not excessive, so it's okay. This one has 0.5 spread, which makes it so it's not necessarily one of the most accurate handguns, but it's not one of the least accurate handguns either. It's kind of in the middle. This one holds 6 shots in the cylinder, as you would kind of expect from a 6-shooter like this. This one weighs 2 weight, so it's very lightweight, and has 200 item health, making it so the 357 actually doesn't break very quick. The 357 also has some other unique things about it, where it is a gate loading revolver, so once you go to load it, you have to open the gate and eject 1 round and load 1 round in for every single shot that you want, up to the 6 shots. I both like and dislike that in this game because it's a really cool animation. I like seeing that in game where it just fits really well with the actual single action army. But at the same time, it's undeniably very slow, and stacking reload speed, having high agility will help this. To the point where you can actually reload this thing like insanely fast, especially if you just see your person just flailing their hands to just unload and load it as quickly as possible. And sometimes the reload speed can kind of mess up when you're the animations when you're going back to shoot it, which is kind of weird, but it is something to kind of keep in mind. So the 357, kind of awkward. The 357 also has the unique ability of it never can jam, so there's no jam animation for this, meaning that even if your revolver is nearly completely broken, it doesn't matter. It's going to reload at the same speed regardless, which is kind of cool. I like that too. For the general pros of the 357 revolver, this one actually has pretty good damage, at least for the early game. It does get outcompeted later on, but it's still decent early on, and it has good ammo. The 357 round is pretty good. It has some good options there, so that's nice. It's also really easy to get quite a bit of this or 38 special to load into it, which is great. For the cons of this, it does have that very slow reload. That's going to be the major con to it, is that the reload is really slow, even slower if you have low agility and if you don't have something like rapid reload, which can reload this much faster. And the other con is that this does fall off later. The 44 Magnum and the Ranger Sequoia are both better than the 357, just objectively. They have higher damage. They usually have better range. The 44 is kind of weird in having worse range, but it does have the scope on it, so that's kind of nice. And ammo, you could argue whether that's better or worse. The 4570 is absolutely the most powerful, but that might not necessarily be better than like the unique ammo that the 357 gets. There are a couple perks that help with this too. Cowboy is an obvious one. Cowboy gives you more damage with the 357 revolver, and since you can get that and this early on, it actually makes for a pretty powerful early game weapon, so that is pretty nice. The Professional can also help with this because this is a pistol, so you can do more damage. Oh, and this does count as a holdout weapon too, which is kind of to be expected for a pistol like this, but it is something to consider. And then VATS perks can kind of help out, not necessarily with the regular 357, but its unique version Lucky, because that actually has very low action points. And then there is a couple different ammos that you can load into the 357. You have the standard 357 rounds. These just give you the regular damage, nothing extra. They're fine. They're probably going to be the most common round that you find. You have the 38 special rounds, which you can buy in bulk early on, and you can just find them from shops early on, which is really cool. The 38 special gives you 25% reduced damage, but it also breaks your gun 25% slower. That can actually be kind of nice in the early game, where breaking your weapon early on could be a pain because you don't really have a whole lot of money or you don't have a whole lot of weapons you can fix it with. Later on, maybe not so much, but it is kind of cool that you can get a decent amount of ammo that way. You have the hollow point rounds. They give you 75% more damage, give the enemies 3 times the armor. Don't use them against heavy armored enemies, use them against light or non-armored enemies. And then you have the jacketed flat points that you can get from the handloader perk. These ones give you 25% more damage, which is awesome. They punch through 3 armor, which is also awesome. And they make your gun even more accurate by 20%. And they come with no downside. They are fantastic. If you have handloader, make as many of them as you possibly can. They're really good in the 357. For an overall rating for the 357 revolver, I would have to put this one into like D tier. Mostly it's just that slow reload, and you can get around the reload a different way. Rather than actually having to reload, you could switch off the 357 and then switch back to it, and it will be fully loaded. That helps, but even that is still a little bit more awkward than other handguns where you could just reload them quickly. So it's not a terrible weapon by any means. I wouldn't put it into like the F tier because I wouldn't mind doing like a full playthrough with the 357 revolver. I think that would be fine. Even if I just had to use the regular 357 revolver, I think it would still be fine. There's a modded version of this too that we need to talk about. The revolver can get 2 mods. You can buy these right at the very start too, so getting a 357 that you could steal from the bar right away and then buying the mods and putting them on there won't cost you a whole lot of money, and you could reasonably do it within the first 2 days that you're in Good Springs, assuming that Chad actually has both of those. So you get a long barrel. This gives you 3 more damage to the revolver, so you go from a base 26 damage to 29 damage. That's pretty good. And then you also have an HD cylinder, which last time I mentioned HD, a lot of people agreed, disagreed on what HD means, for at least in this context of heavy duty, high durability, high density. There was quite a lot of them. High definition. That became kind of its own meme in like the comments of that video. But this gives your revolver 50% more health. So you go from 200 base health to 300 base health, and that's really cool. That makes it so it doesn't break that quick. It's one of the most durable handguns in the game. I think the only other handgun that's more durable than this is like the 44 Magnum once you put the frame on it. So, and this one is still competing with that, and so it doesn't break very quick, which is really cool. It also just kind of looks nicer once you have it. And speaking of looking nicer, this is not what the 357 usually looks like in the game. This is a mod to make it look a little bit nicer. It doesn't actually change the stats or anything, but I do like the look of this better, even if the sight is kind of weird when you're ADSing with it. For the modded 357, I would actually move this one up a tier. I'd put it into C tier. I think it's fine then. It's an okay handgun that has more damage, doesn't break quick, still has the slow reload, but has good bullets. It really depends on when you get this. If you get this like right at the very start of the game, it can be really good. If you get it later on, maybe not as much unless you just really like the look of it. And then there is also the unique version of the 357, which is called Lucky. And you can also get this one right at the very start of the game too. You can get this in Prim. You will need to have 75 lockpicking or a way to cheat out 75 lockpicking. So that could be going with the skill magazine, different things that give you perception, like stacking different chems, or stacking clothing that gives you lockpicking or perception as well. Can make it so you can get lucky really early on, which is really cool. This one requires 0 guns and 3 strength as well, same as the regular one. This one does 30 damage per shot, so better than the 357. This one does 83 damage per second. You can actually spam Lucky pretty fast. You can shoot it really quick, which is really awesome. This one does 30 crit damage, which is perfectly fine. This one has a 2.5 times crit modifier. It actually has one of the highest crit modifiers out of any of the handguns, which is really good too. This one only costs 17 action points, which makes it really good in VATS as well, and that makes it so VATS perks work even better with Lucky. This one has a 0.3 spread, so it's pretty accurate too for a handgun. Holds 6 shots in it like you would expect. Weighs 2.5 weight, which funny enough makes it so that it weighs half a weight more that Pack Rat wouldn't affect it. Pack Rat does affect the regular 357 though, and can cut it down to 1 weight. And Lucky has 225 item health, so more than the regular 357, less once you have the HD cylinder on it. This one is really good. This one I know is a lot of people's go-to handgun. It's one of their favorite handguns. It looks amazing. Feels really good to use other than the slow reload. So I'd put Lucky all the way up into A tier. I think it's fantastic. Is it one of the best handguns? I wouldn't put it up into S tier. There are better handguns than Lucky, both energy weapon handguns and ballistic handguns, but it is still pretty good. And if you get it right at the very start, it can prove to be really, really useful for quite a while, especially if you want to rush either VATS perks, get Cowboy, get Professional, get Hand Loader. So should you use the 357 revolver and its unique variant? Lucky, sure, Lucky's actually pretty good. The regular 357, if you're going to the Cowboy build, sure. If you're going with a guns build, maybe. If you're not going with those and you're going with like melee or explosives or whatever, you probably don't even want to take this as like your backup gun for when things get close. You could probably do better than that with a couple other options, but it's okay. It's not terrible by any means. Today we're going to be taking a look at the police pistol. This is one of our last revolvers to look at. This is another 357 revolver, which there's only technically 3 of these, so maybe I should have included it with that video when I did it, but we're going over the police pistol today. This is the pistol that you can find in the Dead Money DLC. It is exclusive to the Dead Money DLC, however, you can find quite a lot of these in Dead Money. This isn't quite the same as the 357 revolver, where that one is a gate loading revolver, so you have to load in 1 round at a time. This is actually a swing open cylinder, so you can swing it open, you can load all 6 rounds in and swing it back. That does make it so the reload speed is really fast on this. This is still weirdly a single action revolver though, even though it does have a faster rate of fire than the 357. It's still a little bit strange overall that it is that way. You'd think it would just be a double action, but I guess that would require a different animation. They could just put the 44 animation on it. I don't know why they chose to do that. Either way, it's cool that we have another 357 weapon. This one requires 0 guns and 4 strength in order to wield. So if you go right to Dead Money, you can actually probably use this with most characters. Most characters are probably going to have more than 4 strength, and 0 guns is very easy to achieve. This one does 30 damage per shot, which is actually pretty good. 60 damage per second. This one does fire at least fairly fast. Has 45 crit damage on it. Weirdly enough, this has more crit damage than it does regular damage, which makes it so for like sneak crits, this one's actually quite good. And if you want to sneak this weapon into areas, it's actually a really good sneak in weapon. This has a 1x crit chance, which is perfectly normal. Only costs 19 action points. It actually makes it really good in a VATS build too. I mean, Lucky is also really good in a VATS build. I would say it's probably better than this, but the police pistol is a decent option for that. This has 0.5 spread, so not terribly inaccurate, not terribly accurate though. It's kind of in the middle for handguns. This holds 6 rounds in it, as you would expect from a revolver. This weighs 3 weight, and it has 225 item health. The item health is actually quite good. That makes it one of the most durable handguns in the game. I think it's only beat out by like the 44 Magnum once you have the heavy cylinder on it, and the regular 357 once you've got the HD cylinder on it, which I think might be the same as it or slightly less than it. So this is a very durable handgun, which is pretty awesome. For the general pros of the police pistol, this one does have pretty good damage per second. It has a really good ammo. The 357 is very common, both in the regular Wasteland and in some of the DLCs like Dead Money and also in Old World Blues. So if you want to rush Dead Money and then go to Old World Blues, the police pistol wouldn't be a bad option to take. And then this also has really good action point costs so that you can use it in VATS pretty often. The main cons to this though are that it's actually not affected by the cowboy perk. I guess that's kind of a minor con, but it is still a revolver, but it's not affected by that for whatever reason. There is a couple of weapons like that where they should be affected by either cowboy or grunt, but they just aren't, or pyromaniac in quite a few cases, but they just aren't for whatever reason. They just weren't coded that way, which is kind of disappointing for the police pistol. I think if it was affected by cowboy, it would actually be quite a bit better, or if it was affected by grunt, since the army, at least at one point in time, used double action revolvers similar to this one. And then this one is also from Dead Money. That is the other major con to this. I guess that one's the actual major con to this. Going to Dead Money early is very difficult. Dead Money is probably one of the more difficult DLCs. It's probably the second most difficult besides Lonesome Road, I would say. Although with Lonesome Road, you can come and go. Once you go to Dead Money, you're locked into Dead Money. So you can't come back. You can't get resupplies. You can't do anything. And you kind of have to go through the whole DLC. And if you go there at an early level, it can be really rough. If you want to rush it and make it a little bit easier on yourself, I would highly recommend you go with the perk Rad Child. That actually makes it super easy to go through Dead Money because then you don't have to worry about the damage over time from the cloud. The ghost people are still going to give you issues, but if you want to rush it, you can do it that way. And I know not everybody's going to go right into Dead Money right away. I usually don't. It's usually one of the last DLCs that I do. As for perks that actually help with the police pistol, there isn't really any specific perk. Like I said, Cowboy does not affect this one, so that sadly doesn't help it. Pack Rat, I guess, could, thanks to the ammo, but that kind of helps with every type of ammo besides mini nukes. So that one's just a nice quality of life perk, but it can go really on anything, at least if you're playing on the hardcore difficulty. Action point perks are probably the best thing you could invest in with the police pistol if you want to. So Math Wrath or Action Boy or Action Girl can definitely help you there, or something like Gunslinger. If you're dead set on using the police pistol, then those can actually help you out quite a bit. This is also actually a pretty decent weapon in Dead Money, since it isn't the strongest Dead Money weapon, or the strongest weapon you can bring into Dead Money, because if you're counting that, then the Fist of Rar that we talked about not too long ago is the best weapon, and the Bear Trap Fist is probably the second best weapon. The police pistol's decent though. I always keep it on me in Dead Money, especially just to shoot out the radio, since it is accurate enough to do that, and you usually have plenty of 357 rounds. Speaking of ammo, we actually have quite a few different ones. We have the standard 357. This just gets you regular damage, nothing crazy there. You have the 38 special. These break your gun slower, but they do less damage, so they can be kind of useful. You can also buy them in bulk. You have the hollow point rounds. These give you more damage, but give the enemy more armor. Not a big deal if you're fighting unarmored enemies. Luckily, if you're going to Dead Money, I don't think any of the enemies count as being armored besides, I guess, the turrets. The ghost people aren't, and the holograms you can't hurt. And the red roaches don't have any armor either. And then you also have the jacketed flat points, which these ones are pretty awesome. These ones give you more damage and punch through armor and come with absolutely no downside. But you do need to have the handloader perk in order to make these. These ones I would say are one of the best custom ammos in the game. I really enjoy the jacketed flat points. They're pretty cool. And they make it so all the 357 weapons are even better than what they are, which is pretty awesome. For an overall rating for the police pistol, I think I'd put this one up into high B tier. It's actually pretty good as a handgun. It can work really well as a sneak-in weapon. Sadly, I just usually don't get this until I've already gotten through the majority of the game and I go to Dead Money. So the police pistol is not usually on my to-go-to weapons. I'd rather have Lucky if I want a 357 revolver. I like the 44 a little bit more than this. There are other handguns like a light shining in darkness that I like quite a bit more than this too. So the police pistol is kind of an awkward spot, but if you do want to rush dead money and you want to bring this back, it will actually make a pretty good handgun. And that same kind of goes with quite a few of the dead money weapons. They're actually not that bad. Like the bear trap fist is actually pretty decent, and the automatic rifle is actually quite good. So would I recommend the police pistol? Maybe. It's actually pretty decent if you want to rush dead money. It's just it's kind of hard to recommend dead money because dead money is one of the more difficult DLCs. And it's also not everybody's favorite DLC. I actually really like it, but I've played it quite a few times. So things like the holograms and things like the cloud, things like the ghost people and the radios don't bother me that much. Today we're going to be taking a look at the iconic 44 Magnum, a gun that's appeared in almost every single Fallout game so far. And it is the big hand cannon, not the biggest hand cannon in this game, but it's generally one of the big hand cannons of the games. The 44 Magnum I would consider more of a mid-game weapon than anything else, although it can be definitely fine in the late game too. But you're generally going to be finding it towards the mid-game. Sometimes Fiends have this. There are a couple places where you can pick up 44 Magnums that are always guaranteed to spawn. You can buy these off of certain merchants, like the Gunrunners tend to sell them, I think, at every level or at almost every level. So they're not super difficult to find, and they're not super expensive either. For the base stats of the 44 Magnum, this one requires 50 guns and 5 strength to wield. It is, like, dead middle of the pack for everything in terms of stat requirements, so that's perfectly fine. This one does 36 damage a shot, which is fairly high for a handgun. This does 68 damage per second, also pretty high for a handgun. Has 36 crit damage, same as its regular damage, that's pretty normal. Has a 1x crit modifier, nothing really crazy there. Only costs 25 action points to use, making it actually a pretty decent VATS pistol. It's not one of the most crazy VATS pistols, but it's still pretty decent for the damage that you're getting out of it. This one has a 0.7 spread, so it is one of the least accurate handguns in the game. Although if you're going to be only using this at handgun range, that doesn't really matter that much. It's only if you're going to be using this at really long range would that really apply to this. This holds 6 rounds in it, as you would kind of expect for a revolver. Weighs 3.5 weight, so it is a little bit of a hefty handgun compared to others. And this one has the most amount of item health out of the regular gun handguns. This one has 250 item health, which is quite high. That's actually really nice for the 44. Makes it so it doesn't break very quick at all, unless you're going to load in the special rounds. We kind of talked about this with the trail carbine the other day. For the pros of the 44 Magnum, this one does do really high damage. It has really high item HP, so it doesn't break very quick, which is great too, and it has a really good ammo. The 44 rounds aren't super difficult to find. They're not the easiest to find, but they're not the most rare rounds to find either, and it does have some pretty good variations. For the cons of this though, this gun can be a little bit rare or expensive if you're going to try to rush it quickly, but that's maybe not such a huge deal for you, especially if you're going to wait a bit later. And it's also not super accurate. Again, at long range this might matter, at close and medium range this probably isn't going to matter that much. The 44 actually does pretty well across the board at kind of everything. For the ammos you can load into this, you can have the regular 44 rounds. These ones just give you base damage, just like most of the rounds do. You have the special rounds, which these ones break your gun slower, but they also do less damage. They can be kind of nice. You can usually buy these in bulk from vendors. You can buy a couple of them here and there. And the 44 still does enough damage by itself that these aren't going to nerf your damage substantially. You have the hollow point rounds, which can be pretty good. They give you 75% more damage per shot, but they give the enemy 3 times the amount of armor. This is really devastating towards non-armored enemies, less good against heavily armored enemies. It can still be okay, but it's going to be pretty noticeable that you're not breaking through the armor that quickly. And then finally, for the fourth option, you have the semi-wad cutter rounds. These ones you can actually obtain without needing the perk hand loader. If you get the perk hand loader though, you will still get this recipe. But if you don't want to go with that, if you just don't like hand loader for whatever reason, you can actually just run north of New Vegas, talk to a guy up there named Jules, pass a guns check, and then he will give you the recipe and you can make this at any workbench, which is pretty awesome. These give you more damage than the standard 44 rounds. They also punch through 6 armor, which is pretty impressive, but they do break your gun 3 times faster. So if you want to load these into the 44, they are going to be pretty devastating, but they will break the gun very, very quick, which can be kind of annoying. I should also mention that the 44 Magnum and all of its variants, including the modded version and the unique version, all count as improved holdout weapons. So if you have 50 strength, you can sneak any of these into any casino or any holdout area like the fort, which is pretty good. This is probably going to be one of the strongest handguns, at least shot per shot, that you can sneak into anywhere. There are a couple handguns like this, like Lucky or Light Shining in Darkness, Little Devil, at least if you don't have the bugged version of it. Some other guns too, like Sleepy Time, This is one of the better ones that you can sneak in, and it is very devastating, especially if you want to take it in with hollow point rounds, because in almost all of those areas, most enemies don't tend to have much armor, if any armor on, so you can just cut them apart with your 44, which is pretty awesome. For an overall rating for the 44 Magnum, I think I'd put it high B tier. It's pretty good at just kind of everything. It doesn't really suffer from anything. You may not want to use it over something like the Trail Carbine, which I would consider better than this, since the Trail Carbine can hold more rounds, it has more health, it has more damage. But if you want a sneak-in version of this, or if you want to take both of them, and that way you can just share the same ammo pool, then you can do that. That's pretty good too. There is a modified version of this, and there is also the unique version. Let's talk about the modified version, because the modified version does change this quite a bit. For the mods that you can get for the 44 Magnum, you can get 2 of these. You can either get a scope or you can get an improved frame, and you can put both these on. The scope is pretty straightforward. It just makes it so now you have a scope on your gun and you can zoom a little bit further. Nothing really crazy there. It's neither a pro nor a con, just depends on how you enjoy using the gun. If you find the iron sights are perfectly fine, then go ahead and use them. If you don't like that, then the scope could be potentially better. It doesn't give you a huge amount of zoom, and again, you're probably not going to be using this at super long range, but it is decent for like medium range if you would like to use it there. The frame is definitely the thing that helps us out even more, because this gives it even more health. It gives you 50% more health to your revolver, and since this already has the highest amount of item health out of any of the handguns in the game, at least normal guns, then this will increase it even further. So you can have a very, very durable gun. Even more so if you want to load special rounds into this, it takes a very long time to break the 44 then. And with the modified version of this, I'd actually move it up a tier. I'd put it up into A tier just because it takes forever to break this thing, and it's just a straight upgrade over the standard gun, at least the frame. Again, the scope, it's kind of take it or leave it depending on what you like. I usually don't have the scope on there because I like the look of it more without the scope, but if you do like the scope, then feel free to throw that one on there. And then there is one unique version of this, which is called the Mysterious Magnum, which is a really cool handgun. This one you can get in a couple different ways, but it is found by the Lonesome Drifter. You can talk to him, and if you're doing a quest called the Talent Pool, then you can get him a job, and with high enough barter, he can give you this handgun. You could also reverse pickpocket him and take this, or you could just flat out kill him and take it off of him too. He's found just south of the 188 trading post, in between Novak and the 188. Should be able to find him there as you're just heading on up to New Vegas. This one looks a little bit different, as well as it has different stats. And this one also has its own unique effect of playing a theme song whenever you pull this gun out and put it away, which is pretty cool. I think that's the main thing that most people like about this gun. This is a reference to the Mysterious Stranger, which is a perk, and it has been a perk in almost every Fallout game too, where in VAT, sometimes the Mysterious Stranger will just show up and gun something down that you're trying to fight. The Mysterious Magnum requires 50 guns as well, but this time it requires 6 strength, so 1 more strength than the standard 44. This does 42 damage per shot, so even more damage. Does 102 damage per second. The Mysterious Magnum shoots significantly faster than the standard 44, which is pretty cool. This one has a 1x crit modifier, which is fine. This one only costs 22 action points, making it even better for a VATS build, which is awesome. This one has better spread at 0.5, which still isn't way great at very long range, but it does help. This one also holds 6 rounds in it. This one weighs 4, so it's half a weight more. And this one does actually have less item health than the regular version of it, which is a little bit unusual. Most of the time, unique weapons have more health. This one has 150 compared to the 250 that the regular 44 does. So this one does break quite a bit faster. Even more so if you want to compare it to the 44 with the improved frame over just the regular Mysterious Magnum, because then the 44 is pushing 370 HP, which is really nice compared to the 150 that you get here. So this one does break a little bit faster. The increased rate of fire is really nice. The extra damage is really good too. The theme song is iconic, and most people really love it for that. You can still sneak this weapon in too, and this one is all around really good too. I'd also put the Mysterious Magnum up into A tier. I don't think I would put it any higher than that. I can understand some people really liking it as their signature weapon though. I really do. It's a really cool gun. Any of the revolvers in this game are really cool. So a very solid all around gun, but I don't necessarily think it's like overpowered or anything. It's just very good. We should also talk about perks that go along with these weapons too. Cowboy is one that will get you 25% more damage with all of these because they count as revolvers, and that just gets you more damage with revolvers and any other cowboy weapon, so that's really nice to have. You can also take the Professional so that you get more crit damage. That one's pretty nice. Aside from that, just about all the other perks that just get you bonus damages would be nice, so Finesse, better crits, Bloody Mess, really whatever you'd like to put on here. Again, hand loader, but hand loader isn't really necessary if you're only going to be using the 44s as your special round, since they are the only round that you can actually get the recipe for. But if you want to take it early on, you absolutely can, because you could always rush to get the Mysterious Magnum if you're okay with killing the Lonesome Drifter or reverse pickpocketing for it. Same goes with just running up and grabbing a 44, since again there are a couple places that will sell you these or that you can get from various enemies. They're not the most common thing that enemies are going to be carrying around. Sometimes they can be in the DLCs too, like the lobotomites might have them with like hunting rifles and hunting shotguns. And I believe that in like Zion, the white legs can also carry around these, as well as things like brush guns, anti-material rifles. So you could get lucky and get some 44s there. In conclusion, would I recommend the 44 Magnum? Sure. If you're going to go with a handgun build, it's a pretty solid handgun. If you're going with a guns build, it's pretty good. And if you're not going with a guns build, it's still not bad, because it still has enough damage and it is still a holdout weapon. So if you want to take something like this into a casino, let's say you're doing an explosives build, you could sneak a 44 in and that would be perfectly fine. Tell me your thoughts on the 44 Magnum and the Mysterious Magnum. This one was asked quite a bit. Today we're going to be taking a look at a pretty requested handgun. This, I think, has gotten the most amount of requests on the recent videos, and this is going to be looking at that gun and the 5.56 pistol. The Blade Runner revolvers, because it was definitely modeled off of the revolver from Blade Runner, and it looks pretty cool. It's also a very unique weapon overall. Interestingly enough, this isn't even the first game that this weapon has actually shown up in, at least in the Fallout series, because I believe that this pistol is in Fallout 1 and Fallout 2 as well. It's definitely in Fallout 1, I can't remember if it's in Fallout 2 or not. Let's start out with the 5.56 pistol and go over the stats of that, because technically this is the common version of that gun, even though that gun is in the base game, so you can get it whenever you would like. But you do need to have the Gunner's Arsenal DLC if you want to get the 5.56 pistol, which makes it rather interesting because that means NPCs can't have this, at least normally. If you have mods, then that's different, and you're going to have to buy this from a vendor. You can't really find it anywhere just sitting around in the wasteland. This one requires 50 guns and 6 strength. 6 strength is actually quite a lot for a handgun to need. It's not really unreasonable for a character to have 6 strength though. You're probably going to have that much, or you're going to have a way to get to it. Strength isn't one of the more difficult stats to increase, but this is the highest amount of strength I think that we've had for any of the weapons so far. This one does 28 damage per shot. This is just the base damage. It can actually go higher than that thanks to the perk Cowboy, because it does count as a revolver, so you get more damage if you want to go with that perk, which is really awesome. This one has 77 damage per second on it, which is fine. That's a pretty reasonable amount of damage per second with that amount of damage. This has a 28 damage on crit, which is average. Most weapons tend to have the same crit damage as regular damage, and that's just added when you hit a crit and doubled when you hit a sneak crit. This one has a 2 times crit modifier, which is really good. That means whatever your crit chance is actually doubled with this weapon, so that's very nice. This costs 21 action points to use in VATS, which isn't very high. This has 0.6 spread, which is okay for a handgun. It's about on par with most of the other handguns. This holds 5 shots in it. This weighs 5 weight, which is fairly hefty for a handgun. Most handguns don't weigh that much. This one's one of the heavier ones. And this one has 175 HP, which is pretty good. It means it won't break super quick. Like I said, you do have to buy the 5.56 pistol from vendors. You can't get it any other way. I guess you can spawn it in, but that's basically the same type of thing. Vendors do tend to sell this. If you look for traveling merchants, they can have this, as well as they can have some other unique weapons and weapon mods. But the 5.56 pistol, if you can buy it early on enough, it's actually pretty decent. For general pros, this one has a really good ammo. 5.56 is an amazing ammo type because it has so many variations and it's just super versatile. It's also very common, which is great. At least the ammo. The gun itself is not, but the ammo is. This one has good damage per second, which is pretty good. It has good action point cost, so it works pretty well in the VATS build, and it has extra crit chance, which is pretty good too. Hitting crits is always going to be useful just because you're going to get more damage out of it. For the general cons of the 5.56 pistol and that gun, you do either have to buy this weapon or find this weapon, at least in the case of that gun. We'll talk about that in a second. So you can't just find it on raiders, you can't just find it easily. Sometimes vendors don't always sell this. Sometimes you can find it right away, which is really nice. It's kind of just a crapshoot as to whether you can get it right away or whether you're going to have to wait a little bit longer or go to multiple vendors. And I guess the other kind of con is that it has lowish accuracy. It's not the worst. It's very low accuracy for a 5.56 gun because most of them are extremely accurate. I think this one is the least accurate gun that fires that round, besides maybe the light machine gun. I think that one's less accurate, but most of the other weapons tend to be more accurate than the 5.56 pistol. So if you want to get the most value per shot, this one may not be the option for you. But if you just want a 5.56 small slot gun, then the 5.56 pistol is pretty good for that. For ammos, you have the standard 5.56 ammo, which is going to do base damage. You have the 223 ammo. This makes it so you do 10% less damage per shot, but you also break your gun 20% slower. So you can get extra durability from this, which is pretty nice. You can have armor-piercing rounds into this, which nerf your damage slightly, but it makes it so you can punch through armor better, which is fantastic. You can have hollow point rounds, which give your enemy more armor, which doesn't matter if they don't have any armor, but if they do have armor, it can be bad. and you get 75% more damage thanks to those rounds. You can also have the surplus. Surplus gives you 15% more damage, but it does make it so your gun breaks 3 times as fast, so those ones are kind of iffy to use in a weapon like this. And you can have the match rounds, which match rounds make it so you also get 15% more damage, and your gun is even more accurate, which is pretty good. Match rounds are usually what I go with for this gun, but having extra like hollow point rounds and armor piercing rounds in this can be super nice as well. That way you can just switch and use it for any sort of occasion. With the 5.56 pistol being so versatile on our tier list, I would probably put the 5.56 pistol into B tier. It is a very solid weapon. It allows you to deal with basically anything, as well as if you have the cowboy perk, then that helps out a lot where you get more damage. Let's talk about the unique version now, which is that gun. Like I said, that gun is in the base game, so even if you don't have the DLC, you can actually just pick that up right away. It does have slightly better stats than the regular 5.56 pistol, and you can find this one in Novak. You can either buy this one or you can steal this one. So this can be found in the Dino Bite gift shop. Cliff sells this gun, and it's going to run you probably, depending on your barter skill, around 1,500 caps-ish. Again, if you have higher barter, it's going to be lower than that. If you have lower barter, I think it's going to be a little bit higher than that. So it's not unreasonable to buy this. It's not one of the most expensive weapons in the game. But again, you can actually steal this. It's found just in the room next to him. If you open up the door, then you can just walk in there, grab the pistol, and it'll be a stolen pistol, but it will be a free pistol then. This one has the same requirements as the 5.56 pistol, so it requires 50 guns and 6 strength. Kind of heavy for the strength. This does 30 damage compared to the 28 damage that the other one does. This one does 90 DPS compared to 77 DPS. This one has 30 crit damage on it, which is nice. This one actually has a 2.5 times multiplier on it for crit chance, which is one of the highest out of any of the handguns, so hitting crits with this one works really well. This costs 19 action points, slightly less than the 5.56 pistol, which is good. Has slightly better spread at 0.5 rather than 0.6. This one still holds 5 shots, still weighs 5, and this one does have better item health at 225, so it's not going to break super fast. That gun is a pretty solid upgrade to the 5.56 pistol, and you can actually kind of just skip the 5.56 pistol if you just want to run right to Novak and grab this. This is a pretty good early game option since the 5.56 round is so common all throughout the game, and it will carry you quite a ways. This is by no means the best handgun in the game, at least in my opinion, but it is a very solid option. And again, if you get like cowboy perk and you like going with the revolvers, then this one can be really, really good. Its DPS can go up pretty high. And I would put this one a tier higher than the standard 5.56 pistol. Put it up into A tier because it is a very solid pistol all the way around. And it's probably the most versatile pistol in the game just because, maybe not counting energy weapon pistols because sometimes their ammo can be a little bit better too. But that gun is a very solid option all the way around. And just having that huge ammo pool, that huge ammo variety is really nice for this. So should you use that gun or the 5.56 pistol? Sure. If you want to go with this, or if you have excess 5.56, like you're not really using it for a primary weapon, it can be pretty good. There are some better 5.56 guns than that gun. Something like All American, which we'll talk about later in this list, but that's for another day. It's still a very solid option, and if you want just a decent all-around handgun, then that gun is very good. It also just looks really cool, especially if you're a fan of Blade Runner, then by all means use it, because that's always cool to see. Do you want to have the biggest iron in the West? Well, welcome to the Wasteland, where today we're going to be taking a look at the biggest iron in New Vegas. Today we're going to be taking a look at the hunting revolver and its unique variant, the Ranger Sequoia, even though there is multiple Ranger Sequoias, so you can actually get a whole lot of them, which is pretty cool. If you want to run to the Ghoul test site right outside Novak, there is one actually located there. I believe you need to get through a average locked door, and then it's next to a skeleton. So you can pick one of these up right away. There's also a Gunrunner's Arsenal variant of this, so most vendors can actually sell the hunting revolver, which is really cool. Your main issue, at least in the early game, if you get a hunting revolver, is going to be just finding ammo, because 4570 is not the most common ammo. So the hunting revolver requires 75 guns and 6 strength in order to wield. It is a big chunky gun. It does require quite a bit of skill in order to use this. This one does 58 damage per shot. It does hit really hard for a handgun, and just really hard in general. It has 87 damage per second, because this one can actually shoot fairly fast, at least for a gun like this. It is a little bit weird to get used to the recoil though, when you see the gun kind of flip up to where you're more on target than what it seems. So it can be a little bit deceptive there, even though it looks like your gun is still kind of like in the air recoiling, but you can spam this somewhat quick. This one has 58 crit damage, same as its regular damage, which is quite high. This one has a 1x crit modifier, so average crits, 31 action points. This one isn't the best to be using in VATS compared to other handguns. We've talked about quite a few that are really good. The hunting revolver is decent, but maybe not the best for that particular role. This one has very low spread. I believe it's the most accurate normal handgun in the game. not counting unique variants, where it has 0.35 spread, so it has a very tight spread. This one only holds 5 rounds in it, because that cylinder cannot hold 6 unless you have the Gunner's Arsenal version, in which case it can. We'll talk about that here in just 1 second. This one weighs 4 weight. It is a fairly hefty handgun, although 4 weight still seems a little bit light for something like this with how big it is. I don't know though, I've never held a 45-70 revolver, so maybe 4 weight seems accurate to it in real life. This one does have 110 item health, which is okay. It's not the most durable handgun, and it can break pretty quick if you're using the unique rounds in it with the semi-wad cutters, but they're still decent enough. The hunting revolver also always has a scope on it, which is kind of cool. You can't take that off, but the scope is actually pretty nice. This is probably like your sniper of handguns if you want to just do an only handguns run or something. For the pros of this weapon, it does do really high damage and it is very accurate. Both of those are really good things about this gun. The main con to this weapon is that it's very rare though. It's kind of hard to find hunting revolvers, although there are some enemies that do carry them. The Great Khans can carry them, as well as things like the lobotomites can carry them at high levels, which is a little bit scary when they start shooting that at you. But a lot of the time I just end up buying this or getting the one that I know is in the RepCon facility. There are a couple scattered around the map though that you can pick up. So if you can fix them up, you can have a pretty strong weapon. The other, I guess, con of this is just finding 45-70, which can be difficult in the early game, but once you're getting into the later part of the game, it's not going to be super hard, because there are a couple vendors that sell a lot of 45-70. The Great Khan vendor does, and the NCR at the dam does. So if you go talk to the quartermaster there, you can at least get a decent amount of ammo. There is also one perk that we should talk about for these weapons, and that is Cowboy. Cowboy buffs both these since they are cowboy revolver style weapons, which is fitting. It does make these very strong since they get another 25% more damage from that, so that's really cool. And I should also kind of mention that these handguns you can't sneak into places. They are not a sneak-in handgun. They are too big, too bulky. You're not going to sneak this past any place where you need to get a holdout weapon, so I guess that's a little bit of a con for them too. For the different ammos that we have for the 45-70, we have standard 45-70 rounds, which do regular damage, and they're probably going to be the most common around. Sometimes, some vendors tend to sell more hollow points than these. I'm not entirely sure why, but you can pick up some of these every once in a while. Like I said, Great Khan vendor or the NCR can sell them. You have the hollow point rounds, which give you a lot more damage, but also give the enemy bonus armor. These ones can actually be really good in the hunting revolver, even against armored enemies, because it has so much damage base that you might not even care that it's giving the enemy 3 times the amount of armor. You might if it's like Brotherhood or something where they actually have a lot of armor. But other enemies, you might not. If they only have like 5 armor, the hollow points can still be really good. And then you also have the semi-wad cutter rounds, which you can load into the gun, which give you more damage but break your weapon substantially faster. I love this ammo though. I usually load it into mine. You have to have hand loader in order to get this, but it is a very fun round to be firing through this. It also punches through some armor, I believe. Or maybe that's only the 44. Stats will be up above. For an overall rating for the hunting revolver, I'd put this thing all the way up into A tier. I think it's a solid all-around handgun. It is really good, and it feels really fun to be shooting. It is very powerful. There is also a modded version of this, so we should talk about that really quick. With the Gunner's Arsenal version, you will need to have a Gunner's Arsenal hunting revolver in order to put the mods on, and this one can get 2 mods. It can get a larger cylinder, so it goes from holding 5 shots to 6 shots, as well as it can have a match barrel, which decreases its spread, increasing its accuracy. So its spread goes from 0.35 down to 0.2. making it one of the most accurate handguns in the game, which is really cool. If you want to add these onto there, they are just a bonus to the handgun. You can usually find them at a lot of vendors. A lot of vendors tend to sell these, although if you're like me, you might get unlucky and not find that and find hunting shotgun or hunting rifle, not find hunting revolver, or vice versa if you're looking for one or the other. But at least you can look for quite a few vendors because they tend to sell these. I would put the modded version of the hunting revolver also up into A tier. I think it's pretty good. It's not immensely better than the regular one, but it is a nice upgrade overall. And now let's move on to the Ranger Sequoia, probably the most iconic weapon, or one of the most iconic weapons in Fallout New Vegas. So this one you can actually get during a quest. If you want to go do Return to Sender, you're going to have to steal it at the end of that quest, but you can get it, and you can do that at any level. Other than that, the veteran Rangers will also carry this on them, at least usually. And this is like their signature weapon. They usually carry this, the anti-material rifle, and the brush gun. 3 very strong weapons overall. So the Ranger Sequoia does look a bit different than the hunting revolver, and it can't have any of the mods the hunting revolver gets. So you can't put a scope on this, you can't get a bigger cylinder, and you can't put a match barrel on this. But I would argue the Ranger Sequoia really doesn't need it. The iron sights are quite good on this, and I mean the way it looks is just one of my absolute favorite guns in just about any game. This is one of my favorite handguns like ever. So the Ranger Sequoia for stats requires 75 guns and 6 strength, same as the regular hunting revolver. This one does 62 damage per shot, so a little bit more. 105 damage per second, which is pretty good for a weapon like this. It doesn't shoot super quick, but still a lot of DPS because of that high damage. Does 62 damage for crits. Has a 1.5 times crit modifier, so it's more likely to hit crits than the regular hunting revolver, which is good. This one costs 30 action points. I don't know why it costs 1 less action point than a hunting revolver in VATS, but I guess it's a bonus. This one has even less spread, and being the most accurate, at least of the ballistic handguns, at 0.1 spread, so it is extremely accurate. And this one also holds 5 rounds in it, weighs 4 weight, and this one has 150 item health, so it has more item health than the regular hunting revolver, which is pretty good. The Ranger Sequoia, I think, is one of my absolute favorite handguns in any game ever. It feels really good to use, it looks really cool. This mod on here, even though it makes it look cooler, just the regular Ranger Sequoia looks really cool too. It is all around a monster of a gun, and it's one of my favorite handguns to go for in this game. The Ranger Sequoia I would put all the way up into S tier. I think it is a fantastic handgun. So would I recommend the hunting revolver and the Ranger Sequoia? Hunting revolver, yeah, it's quite good, it's quite powerful, as long as you find ammo for it, really good. Ranger Sequoia, absolutely, I love this thing, it looks so cool, it's one of my favorites. And it's super powerful too, which is awesome. Only downside is that you can't sneak these into areas, but I can always sneak in something like Chance's Knife or Lucky if I want to do that too, and then I've got also a pretty good sneak-in weapon, or if I really want to have something like incredibly strong, just a light shining in darkness, which is another one of my favorite handguns in any game. So thank you guys so very much for watching this. Tell me your thoughts on the Ranger Sequoia and the hunting revolver down below. That actually wraps up all the handguns that we have to talk about in New Vegas. And thank you guys so very much for watching this. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everyone.